And Dean, my fellow MP, joined in 2019, the MP for Watford. So what's your interest in this area and why are you part of this panel? What have you
Well, it's an absolute privilege to be here. For me, mental health is something that throughout my adult life I've witnessed and been involved and tried to champion positive mental well-being and mental health. In fact, 4 years ago I was on the stage at the conference talking about loneliness, and I made the point then that, you know, we used to be lonely in a crowd. Now we seem to be lonely in the cloud, and to the points about social media. And over the past 3-4 years, I've really seen mental health become a much bigger part of the conversation. So when I stood to be elected in 2019, I had a pledge. And that pledge was to train 1,000 mental health first aiders across Watford, which is my constituency, which I'm very fortunate to have brilliant partners, including the Watford Chamber of Commerce, to deliver on that. But what I've seen as I've had those conversations is not just a growing need for it, but a growing understanding around mental health that I think comes from us having these sorts of conversations, by being open about it. And that led to me being an ambassador for Where's Your Head At? And as part of that, I put together a 10-minute rule bill to try and make sure that mental health first aid was on parity within businesses with first aid. We all know that if you injure yourself in the workplace, you know where to go to the first aider. I want to make sure that everybody within the workplace knows that if they are having mental health challenges, that they know where to go to be signposted for help. And I'm also on the Health and Social Care Select Committee. So we've looked very heavily at mental health in the workplace, within the NHS and within society. And then finally, just to come back to our previous speaker's point, I'm on the Online Safety Bill Committee, and as part of that, been very fortunate to interview people like Rio Ferdinand through to Jimmy Wales about the role of social media within mental health. So for me, it's in the round, but to sum up before going to the questions, I think for me it's the duty of all of us, from members of Parliament, CEOs, parents, children, siblings, teachers, all of us, to be talking about the importance of looking after each other, to be kind to each other, but also making sure we're signposting people to the right support. And that, for me, is absolutely inherent in what we do as a society and as a community. And I'm really proud that we're doing this particular discussion at the Conservative Party conference this year.
Oh, that's fantastic. And thank you all of you for joining. I can't wait to dig into some of those experiences. So I think, Dean, you're on the Online Harms Bill Committee. So listen to what Jonathan said, and obviously this is going through Parliament at the moment. What's your feeling of how far we can go to try and hold at least there to be some sort of a legislative accountability or some risk, I guess, that you may have a class action lawsuit against you, or there'll be some consequences?
So at the moment, we're in the early stages of really reviewing the bill. It's a joint committee, so we're working with Lords, it's cross-party, and MPs to really scrutinise. And we've had a real range of witnesses so far, as I say, footballer Rio Ferdinand, through to Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, and many others. And I think there's various things that are coming out to me that I'm finding is that, you know, that we've got to balance freedom of speech, but also we've got to make sure that we take on the responsibility of supporting and ensuring children aren't seeing abusive messages, but also that we're not spreading harm. And I think one thing that really comes through for me is the nature of the technology for algorithms, to make sure that when people are saying stuff online, it isn't then instantly spread to everyone and anyone who might see it, especially children. And I think there's an element here about communities, both online, but also communities with regards to the real world, to make sure that what people are saying online isn't then spread into harm offline. So you're looking at things like bullying, you're looking at, you know, language that people you would have thought years ago would have been lost, you know, and never seen again. But now we're seeing Twitter handles and hashtags spreading quite vile conversations and language that people can see en masse. And I think we've got to make sure we get the language right. And I think within the Online Safety Bill Committee, we're really trying to delve in deep to say, actually, what's the right balance to get between enabling somebody to have the right to say something and have the freedom to say something, but not making sure that that isn't then spread into children's iPhones and elsewhere, because at the moment I think the balance isn't quite right, and that's why this bill is so important.
Yeah, I agree. And there's something struck there by something Jonathan said, which is there's nothing more interesting than what's going on in the screen. And that's probably because the screens are limitless, right? You can find out anything, you can watch anything, you can see or engage in anything online. And of course, what you can do outside is always going to compete. It's almost like you'll do your homework when you're sat in a library because, you know, there's nothing more interesting to do or whatever. It's that kind of mentality. So the work in the communities and the mental health awareness, but also getting families involved in trying to, as Jonathan said, be a part of this solution, as much as parents feel probably a little not empowered in some ways, right? Because you've got child pressure, right, in terms of wanting to be on these platforms.
I think for me, it's empowering people to be able to speak out. You know, I think for children in particular, they might not know that what they've just seen on a screen is something that they should tell their parents about, and making sure that that communication is there, but also making sure that within society we stick to the bounds of what is right and wrong and what actually we can do to support people. The reason why I wanted to have this incredibly ambitious goal of having 1,000 mental health first aiders across Watford, and we've already got many, and we're already hundreds into the training, but I don't want it to stop at 1,000. But my take was so that actually within society, people who are barbers, people who are working in shops, not just in offices, but across society, are able to understand signs if somebody needs some help, if somebody needs to just talk, but also somebody knows that they can go to somebody for support. And that also means online as well, so that they know that if something's affecting them and making them feel depressed or anxious, that they know where to go to. And I think that's a challenge, because if you look at social media, I've worked in digital for many years, it's come upon us very quickly. You know, the generational change of what's happened with social media has happened over, 10, 15 years in reality. And so we've got to make sure that we understand what effect that has on children, but also on adults. And I think if you're being barraged with negative communications all the time, and there's people out there who will latch onto that and say even more negativity, that can really affect a person. So I think we have to go back and look at the ground rules of how we work as a society, but also really make sure that we put at the heart of everything a sense of compassion and understanding and an ability to talk about it.
And of course, as a politician, everybody's thinking Twitter right now in terms of the abuse that we all get. Actually, many leaders in society, even head teachers, get now on these platforms. And that has certainly changed the discourse as well. In terms of the community, Dean, and all the fabulous work you're doing as an MP, what have you learned about how we can really get to tackle some of these very serious issues that, if we don't have an answer, is going to really have an impact? I mean, obviously we're doing a lot to build up resilience, but what can we do more? I
think there's an element of, there's several things actually. First of all, one of the things I learnt during the pandemic, especially the first lockdown, I was very fortunate to be able to go out and volunteer a lot. And at the end of 2020, I wrote a report with colleagues called Connecting Communities. And it was to try and learn and how do we bottle the positive aspects of community engagement during the pandemic, where people were going to help neighbours. I often say, I delivered more bags of shopping to vulnerable people than leaflets in my first year as an MP, which is sort of unheard of, And but the reason why was because actually, even for me in my role, I felt it important to be able to go out and help people. And I think there's a sense of hope when you do volunteer. You can sometimes feel hopeless in terms of having no sense of agency or purpose. And so I think engaging with other people, helping other people, gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of certainty, and what can make a difference. And I think when you look at that then within business and within organisations, the reason why I'm pushing for mental health first aiders within every business isn't because I'm trying to put another burden on businesses, because there's always a challenge there. But actually, if you've got a workforce that are happy, a workforce that get a sense of purpose from their job, that know that they're being supported, that will make a massive difference. I was chatting to a businessman just the other day who, throughout the pandemic and prior to that, has enabled counselling for all of his staff. And actually, he hasn't had one person leave the business in the past 2-3 years, because actually they know that they'll be supported, and they know that they come to work and they're in a family environment. And I think there's a real sense actually that for businesses, there's an opportunity here for effectiveness, for outcomes, both for the community, for the workforce, for shareholders even. The other part for me, though, if I may, is that I think the opportunity here is to reframe what community means. And I think actually what we did find where we were going out and knocking on our neighbours' doors for the first time probably ever during the pandemic is we got to know each other physically and in the real world. I think in my maiden speech I remember saying that most people probably, well, a lot of people nowadays probably knew the names of all the Kardashian sisters more than they knew the names of their neighbours. And I think that changed during the pandemic. And I think the more we can find a sense of agency, a sense of purpose, but an opportunity to enable people to go out and support each other through charities, through volunteering, through that sort of work, that also helps people. And I think that's going to be so important as we look forward.
It's fantastic. So that sense of community, that sports in the community, well-being in the community, but also I think the important message here is this is something that all of us have to do. All of us have to play our part, including the social media giants, to basically help support the next generation and everybody with their mental health. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you.